Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Lucas Mann is the author of Lord Fear and Class A, Baseball in the Middle of Everywhere. His essays have appeared in Guernica, BuzzFeed, Slate, and the Kenyon Review, among others. He teaches creative writing at UMass Dartmouth and lives in Providence, Rhode Island with his wife. Joy Press has been writing about TV for more than 15 years. Her latest book, Stealing the Show: How Women Are Revolutionizing Television, is a definitive look at the rise of the female showrunner. She has contributed to publications such as New York Magazine, the New York Times, Vogue, and Guardian. She lives here in LA. We're delighted to have both Lucas Mann and Joy Press with us this evening. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks to Joy for being here. I have to get to talk about something with a pro, as opposed to whatever this is. This is the last scheduled book tour thing that I have, and it feels appropriate to be in LA for it. Just today, I saw Jax Taylor, who is a reality star who features in this book, drive past me. And I also went to Lisa Vanderpump's dog clothing store and purchased a jacket for my dog. So this feels right. Before we talk, I'm just going to read for 15 minutes. The book is kind of a hodgepodge of different stuff. Some of it more personal essayistic, some of it more scholarship or criticism, I guess, which for the purpose of this book counts as just sort of very detailed descriptions of things that happen on reality shows. And then there's some sort of journalistic parts as well. And so hopefully I'll read something that gives kind of a sense of all of that. And one thing to know is that a lot of it is sort of epistolary and written to my wife, sort of talking about these shows with her. Okay, so I'm just going to read. Cool. Robert Galinsky makes characters for a living. People come to him as themselves, leave as something a little more. Galinsky invented and still runs the New York City Reality Television School, the first and only of its kind, preparing hopefuls for their cattle calls, like a Lee Strasberg reconceived for 21st century ambitions. When I meet him, he's guarded. The only press coverage he's ever gotten has been brutal, but after I tell him sincerely that I find his critics to be pearl clutchers, he becomes animated and jumps right into telling me about one of his best students. There was this girl I had come in, he tells me. She walked with a cane and she had a service dog. I asked her, "Who are you?" She said, "I'm the girl who has a prescription pill addiction because I'm mentally ill." She asked me if that was okay, and I asked her if she was okay with it. And she said, "Oh yeah, it's true, that's what I'm bringing to the table." And so we went with that. Galinsky finishes his anecdote with a proud shrug and leans back into a leather couch. We're in a coffee shop in Alphabet City that seems to serve as his home base. He comes out of experimental theater and improv, speaks in those terms, wears jeans with flip-flops and red sunglasses that are a bit of a personal trademark. The barista kids know he always orders a macchiato. For a long time, he was just an improv coach. He started teaching reality when an Argentinian dog groomer called the number on his website and said he had a month to prepare for an audition for a show that would end up being called Groomer Has It. Galinsky lets that name hang out there like I'll recognize it. Remarkably, I don't, but no matter. If I'd seen the show, I would have seen Jorge become the star. Out of all the groomers, it was Jorge whom everyone wished good things for. He played the whole damn season from hero position, just like an improv game, the way Galinsky taught him to, and he killed it. He didn't win the show, but he won affection. He proved to be watchable, and after his season, he landed a role on TLC's Extreme Poodles. He was never the guy who threw the glass at the wall, Galinsky tells me. He was the guy who went up to the glass thrower and said, "Don't do that. Why'd you have to do that? What are you feeling that made you do that?" Galinsky figured out pretty fast that the same principles he'd always taught improvers applied to reality shows. That willingness to constantly stoke the story forward, that in-the-moment fearlessness, sustained commitment above all else. A common misconception among people who deride reality performers, he tells me, is that nobody's interested in the ones who don't get into fights, that they provide no intrigue. The truth is, and any seasoned on-the-fly performer knows this, if you jump into the middle of a fight to break it up, you become a hero, or you become someone trying to be a hero, and as long as it seems genuine, everyone wants to see someone try to be that. I agree with this, and then we both try to come up with that F. Scott Fitzgerald quote about heroes, but we can't quite remember it, so we go back to TV and what makes for a great performance of self. We speak of Rodney King breaking down on Celebrity Rehab, Galinsky's favorite of the shows, and the guy from Taxi, and the drummer from that grunge band. They were so fucked up, these men. They were so pained, and they had been pained for so long, telling the story of their pain, like every day of their lives had been an audition for that moment they could finally be that pained for an audience. I don't know if you should exactly call it talent, Galinsky says, but yeah, it always helps if they've got some really fucked up lived material to draw upon. That's a scab that he can pick at, help turn into the blood that an audience tunes in for. We're back to his pill-addicted, cane-using pupil. I asked Galinsky why she wanted that to be who she was on a television show. And did it work? Galinsky can't remember, but he's pretty sure she hasn't made it onto whatever show she wanted to get on. Doesn't matter. Those producers must be insane, he says. And the important thing, anyway, is that she went into her audition clear-eyed and armored. She would be an active storyteller. She would be the one valuing her trauma, valuing it enough to lead with it, as opposed to letting some producer ferret it out and then define her with it. I asked Galinsky if he's proud of that anecdote. It's a leading question and gets the expected answer. He helped, in his own way and in his own view, to give this woman some combination of the three qualities that any teacher wants to provide to their students: authenticity, confidence, power. He tells me he teaches 2 classes at Rikers Island, and he tries to provide the soon-to-be paroled with the same qualities as the soon-to-be on TV. We sit silent for a moment, and I consider the 2 neat, though flawed, parallels he set up. Reality performer as prisoner, reality show as the world, which makes him some combination of shrink, parole officer, and career counselor. This all smacks of new agey self-empowerment in a way that would ordinarily make me uncomfortable. It still does a little, as we sit in the kind of coffee shop that guys like us always sit in, drinking our macchiatos and sneering about shows like CSI because they have no life, no guts to them. Guts, we agree, come from people like Galinsky's pill-addicted, cane-using student. He prodded her to reveal to a circle of fellow wannabe stars in class the tagline that she would put on her life, and regardless of its manufacturedness, it worked because it was nakedly pained, because it made you worry for her or tisk at her. And this exercise prepared her to repeat that story in an audition, to repeat that story as the official one, recorded, hopefully broadcast and commodified. If she wanted to be that brave, Galinsky says, and he leans forward on brave like he really means it. If she wanted to be that brave, then good. She was ready to tell her story. Brave is a tough word to accept, I think, and bravery a tough concept. The lines between bravery and arrogance or ignorance or stupidity or worse, desperation, sometimes it's hard to trust that those lines are there. But what else to call such an act? To put a name on yourself that marks you a freak or an asshole or a reclamation project, and then to step in front of a blinking red light, open source material for the producers to do with what they will. Maybe I'm using bravery to describe what is really the internal calculation of how much attention one wants, or sometimes believes that they need, and how much one is willing to risk to be seen. But I want to be seen, to be known somehow. I dream of it, and I've never risked anything like that, and so that act of risk makes this woman at least a little extra deserving of whatever it is that she wants. And whatever she wants seems less important in the face of what she'll do in the service of the wanting. It's not the car wreck people are looking for, Galinsky says, and I'll admit this sounds a little rehearsed. It's that moment when the car wreck is inevitable, and we're wondering if someone will survive. So the camera turns on. crash, and then. Ask me for a tragedy and I'll point you to Rob Kardashian. I can't imagine it's easy to be younger brother to Courtney, Kim, and Khloe, older brother to Kendall and Kylie, each one so forceful and beautiful and impervious to wilting. Even in the earlier days, the happy times, Rob always stayed at the edges of the screen, darting into scenes as a gentle foil or affable peacemaker. He operated as a sort of cipher for vaguely appealing normalness, often doofy and jovial, occasionally pouty, typically vain, always incompetent but sincere. I'm not the first person to argue this, but to say that the Kardashians' success is superficial is a disservice. They elevate superficiality. They are so good at it, so committed, so fully and captivatingly bared, so productive. They make no effort to make it look easy. It can become exhausting to tune into. Not Rob. Rob is attrition and apathy. Rob is trapped in the way that most compelling characters are trapped, in the way that I often feel trapped. Rob changes in directions that he does not want to change, and all of it is seen. Let me just admit this right away. I like to Google Fat Rob Kardashian to look at the image results. You know this. I think you do it too. There are many results. If you wanted to, and I think someone should, you could make a collage of these images that runs around all the walls of a giant gallery space. Tens of thousands of images with no break in between, many of them almost the same but not quite. It would be as though he were never not viewed, like a flipbook of a life spent flaunting and hiding himself at the exact same time, his eyes always peering out from under a baseball cap to see who is looking, and it's hard to tell whether he's checking to see if he's safely alone or checking to make sure that someone still cares to watch. Many of the pictures come spliced next to his early shots, the ones where he's shirtless and celebrating something insignificant in a horizon pool, tattoos dotting his muscled side abs like gum splotches on a cobblestone street. And then there is narrative just in this juxtaposition, a tragedy because look, he used to be one way, and look, now he's another, and look, it's still happening, and we get to watch him face it. I love to watch him face it. I think Rob and I are the same age. That must have something to do with it. He has been on television as himself for the exact span of time that I have loved you, and I have so badly wanted you to see me as the narrow, nubile, carefree kind of beautiful that he used to be. He used to cavort in his shots. That's the best word for it. We used to watch him just sort of hang around the family mansion, 23 and still living at home, eating a banana or drinking a beer, winking at the camera in a way that read less obnoxiously cool, more endearingly incompetent. He always seemed a bit adrift, a bit bored, and I took comfort in seeing somebody enact this condition successfully, one that I felt but could never accurately convey. He seemed not performatively ecstatic, just happy enough, happy in a way that is unnoticeable unless someone is really watching, and of course we were always really watching, and there was pleasure in seeing him exist as the least remarkable person in the room. Now when we watch him, we see the way he tries to hide his enlarged self, see his family speak about him in whispers with cruel worry. We talk about how long ago it was that Rob cavorted, and it always feels at least a little bit profound to point out the way time passes, how ominous that can be. We were still living in Iowa the first time Rob broke down in a scene that had clearly been orchestrated for a breakdown. Family therapy held in what looked to be a vintage furniture showroom, complete with ornate velvet couches and fur blankets draped over mid-century chairs. Rob had on a black baseball cap, as would become the norm, presumably to hide the creeping baldness, and an oversized black hoodie to hide everything else. He grew increasingly upset at accusations flying his way. He began to tear up as the therapist coaxed him. "You look sad. Am I misreading you?" Then fled to the bathroom. His mother and two of his sisters, immaculate in dress and posture, stayed on the couch, stoic. Another sister and the therapist, and I would guess 2 or 3 cameras, followed him. The bathroom wasn't huge, so he was trapped, and the cameras were tight on him. The shot stayed mostly on him in profile, newly expanding torso heaving, the lightly stubbled beginnings of a double chin accordioning as he cried. He held a hand towel over his face, and there was that drama of watching someone so closely as they show you how little they want to be watched. "All I care about is like saying yes to my mom and making her happy," he said, trapped in there. He looked up. and doing whatever my sisters want to make them happy. And when it comes to the easiest things, they won't help me. Here he buried his head back in the towel and squeaky cried. The therapist's bony hand was on his ample shoulder. She was kneading him, and her enormous pewter bracelet shone in the lighting. In an on-the-fly cutaway to his mother and sisters sitting without him, his mother, stone-faced, said, "I like it when he's vulnerable, because I think he needs to break those walls down. He's so angry." Watching it, I was struck by how much she genuinely seemed to think she was caring for him, and also how much she was consciously writing him into this sad, angry man-boy, handing him over to the viewers as such. Of course, the next shot was back to Rob, trying to articulate that there are so many things that he wants to do, successes that he should have, that dress sock company that showed such promise, and if his father was alive, his father might understand a little better. The therapist brushed that away, called it a top-layer issue, told him that he had spent too much time running from his feelings, from his very self. "You're one of those steam kettles, Robert," she said. "You know, sitting on the stove on the fire. You're so full of feeling." Then, on cue, he boiled, the squeaking louder, the wheezing breaths more frequent, burying his face again. I realized that the editors had never fully cut out the transition music, just lowered it so there was a thumping, somber hip-hop beat carrying through the moment, like we were in an old ship's furnace, and the panic and the inevitability were all heightened that much more. "I've got you," the therapist said, which again towed a line between caring, commanding, and threatening. "Come on, let me see your face." Rob obliged, moved the towel, and, face exposed, camera creeping even closer, said, "Nothing matters. Nothing's going to change." There was one perfect beat extra, and then a cut. So I'm going to read a totally different part really quickly before we move on, just to, I don't know, give a sense of the breadth or something. And also because, like, you know, I was writing a book about reality television around the time that Donald Trump was running for president, and then the book was like out being read by an editor to hopefully be bought, and Donald Trump was elected president, and that is that sucks. But it also, right, like it's part of this in a way that maybe I don't fully want it to be, and there's parts in the book that make explicit how not fully I want it to be, including like a terse email exchange between my editor and I, in which I refuse to write that much about it. But I do think that it sort of emphasizes a lot of the themes that in some way the book was trying to think about while trying to avoid him, right? This sense of responsibility as a viewer, or this sense of personal pleasure in watching something, and how that relates to not thinking about anything other than personal pleasure, right? Or all of these things about the sort of the intimate nature of emotion and of voyeurship, and then the rest of the world that's out there. And so there's sort of my version of a postscript kind of thing at the end, which manages to, I don't think, ever say his name, and be pretty non-overt. But this is something from the end of the book that I guess hopefully captures some of that. "All I have wanted to do lately is look at you. It feels good to do that. Good because I know your face so well, and your body, and how each contorts with a different type of movement or mood, and how that feels like frankness, honesty, since I know it well enough to trust what I'm seeing and its beauty. Solmaz Sharif's incredible poem, Look, begins like this. It matters what you call a thing. It's a poem about pain and bigotry and terror and the danger of America acting upon the poet's Iranian-American body without looking, or looking at her body without seeing her. She traces the 16 seconds that it might take between a button pressed in Las Vegas and a Hellfire missile hitting Mazar-e-Sharif, how casually and quietly our nation can kill a type of person we've decided to name an enemy. Then she ends with this. Let it matter what we call a thing. Let it be the exquisite face for at least 16 seconds. Let me look at you. Let me look at you in a light that takes years to get here. I had forgotten about the poem until I read it in a coffee shop while trying to write about reality television. I was having a hard time focusing, and I was on Twitter, and I was scrolling and glancing and occasionally reading, And then Gia Tolentino, a writer I really admire, said that this was the poem that kept her sane in these times, and I wanted to be attached to her attempt, her wisdom, so I read the poem. And I was so moved. I am so moved writing this, tears on my fucking keyboard and all that. Literal tears, no metaphor. Look, I want to. Look. When I see that word repeated, an invitation, a command, I want to be near you so I can look at you. Maybe that's all I'm crying for. Or worse, maybe I'm crying about the idea of myself looking at you, about the absolving power of intimacy, context fading like fog and wind, even as the poem demands that context be unavoidable. I do believe that the personal is always political, and even if I sometimes waver in that belief, I trumpet it loudly enough to my students that I start believing again. After the election, I handed out photocopies of Arendt's On Refugees, Orwell's Why I Write, held them up as cajoling proof of the power and responsibility of a personal story in a dangerous world. Now I hear myself so often in class demanding the acknowledgement that the personal and political must run hand in hand, but usually my students' responses suggest that the political is a burden to their personal narratives, as opposed to an opportunity. The political doesn't deepen what they want to say, it corrals it, it diffuses or defuses. When my students write about love, they want it to be about just that, on the nose, love, and that should be enough. Or loss, just loss, the only story to tell. Or rage, or pain, or triumph. And sometimes that's frustrating, and I know teachers who consider it their jobs to make a student leave class with some diminished sense of his or her own importance in the face of the adult world. But sometimes I think, how can anything feel larger than their own feelings, their own heartbreaks? And in that way, what is intimate, what is entirely theirs to feel, blocks out everything. It's the shadow of an eclipse edging its way across a sun that is every important thing that is happening to and for and with everyone else in the world. All the rest is too bright to look at head on, anyway. And I see myself in them, of course. I return to myself in the poem and the command to look, and I think that I am looking, but when I think of the power of looking, there I am looking at you, and then looking at the idea of myself looking at you. The exquisite face for 16 seconds, a light that takes years to get here. It is so much more than two faces pressed close, love-lit, staring, but it's also that. And there is the shadow of an eclipse edging across the sun. Thank you.
Well, at least I managed not to cry. the beautiful passages and the incredibly poignant ode to Rob Kardashian. One of the things that really struck me about this book, which is really fabulous, was that I think so many people think about reality television as mindless, and I actually think that a lot of people watch it in order to not think, right? I mean, it's sort of a replacement life where you're sort of, you're tuning in. And I have to say, I don't watch it much anymore, but I used to find that it was very ambient. There was a way in which you could watch it that you couldn't watch Breaking Bad. You have to pay attention to a certain kind of scripted television. And so, I mean, I really found it remarkable, the sort of the layers that you unpeel, and you can't stop thinking when you're watching reality TV. I mean, you're really bringing your full sort of attention and heart, and I mean, it's very much sort of a book about love, as well as sort of thoughtful and a meditation on self and performance and all those kinds of things. But I really did not expect to be moved by the tale of Rob Kardashian.
I'm glad that it worked.
So tell me, as you said, and you heard a little bit in those passages. I mean, it's a letter. It's written in the form of kind of a letter to your wife. Was that always the intention? What was the original sort of thing that made you start writing it this way?
That wasn't the intention for the book to look that way at all. And I think the book ended up being a lot more personal than I think I told myself was my intention. And there were some moments where it seemed interesting to play around with the address to my wife. And then it just sort of kept feeling like the right thing. And then just sort of anecdotally, I got interested in the idea that when you talk to people about watching reality shows, I think maybe kind of in terms of what you were talking about in terms of its difference from scripted shows or whatever, like there's in the same way that people don't like to talk about drinking alone, there's that sense of like it's a social experience, or it's something that is contextualized in an autobiographical and lived way, maybe more than other forms of entertainment. Like when you talk to somebody about whatever their show is, it's like, oh yeah, it was weird, like I broke up with somebody and then I was back living with my sister and we hadn't been close in a while, but I was living with her, and then she watched the Kardashians and I was like, what is this? But then I started watching the Kardashians with her and then we'd argue about it, right? Like there's these sort of things that it becomes social. And I'm generally interested in a writer as trying to sort of make permeable the boundaries between like the text that you're writing about and then like the lived experience of writing about the text, and not having the autobiographical and the critical be separate. And so I just love that idea of like, it wasn't just like, oh, here's a show that I have something to say about, but it's like you're watching the show and then you're also living your life watching the show, and you're spending hours of your day in some cases watching the show. And part of the way that I think about reality TV in my head is as a conversation as part of a lived experience shared with somebody. And so it just sort of ended up feeling more and more organic, and I just sort of kept doing it until I eventually convinced myself that I could just keep doing it.
So just to make it a conversation, to keep it in that voice.
Yeah, and also there was something I wanted to. I realized at a certain point that I didn't want to write like detached cultural criticism about reality TV. That I wanted to, in some ways, meet the performers at like the appeals of their performance. And so the idea of it being structured as this confession in some ways, and in that weird way that reality shows do, when there is like the personal intimacy happening between two people on screen, but then you're like, you're doing this for cameras, right? I got interested in mimicking that formally. Right,
so you were doing it for this camera,
right.
The reader.
Right, yeah.
Well, so we were talking about this a little bit beforehand. I became a TV critic at the exact same time that reality TV was born. And so my early years of writing about TV were writing about reality TV, and it was new. And so to me, it was like culturally fascinating to be seeing these new forms coming. And I actually, embarrassingly enough, predicted that it was going to burn itself out in 2 years because it was moving so quickly. But one of the things that I heard all the time was that it was really embarrassing to, as a sort of thinking person, to be wasting your time. Aren't you wasting your time? And I thought it was interesting because the question of shame is very sort of, interwoven with so many of the things that you write about in your book, both in terms of your shame in watching it and the shame, kind of embedded in these shows.
Yeah, I think that that's a huge part of it. And I also think that is part of what makes it actually kind of an active viewing experience. I understand the sort of ambientness of it, but I also think that it can't not be fraught. And I think that perhaps because it is only talked about in ways that you should be embarrassed about, there is an extra level of activity in sort of emotionally and intellectually when you engage with it than there is in other shows. Like particularly now with, as you well know, like sort of prestige television moment, right? Like I can, space out and watch the entire season of like some prestige show on Netflix and like feel good about it. You know what I mean? Like but you know what I mean? That like
you get a pat on the back.
Right. Like there was something that was traditionally a low form, and that part of the conversation with it always had to do with this weird ambivalence that people had interacting with it. And since reality TV has become popular, that's been all like coinciding with the exact moment in time in which every other aspect of TV has been adopted as essentially right. I mean, how many like TV is the new novel things, right? So I think that there is like a particular interaction where you have to engage with yourself as the viewer of these shows and see yourself and question your motives in a way that you don't with really any aspect of popular culture anymore, that for better or worse I think adds like a real layer of tension to the experience of viewing it that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and I mean, you also, you just used the word confession, and you know, I mean, I wondered, because obviously you've written memoir, how that relates to the kind of sort of memoir and the kind of confession. Obviously, on reality TV, it's structured, right? There's actually the confessional. I mean, that's part of the format now, is you have to go, no matter what show it is, there's a way in which you go and you confess.
Yeah, the room is called that, right? It's like literally, yeah, they put you in the place where you're made to, it's like church.
And that's been true, I think, maybe even since The Real World.
Yeah.
Like, they had a confessional room. So, you know, it's like you have the reality of whatever they're filming and that they've chosen to put on the screen, and then there's the confessional, that's the really real stuff. But how did that inform your thinking about memoir in this project?
Yeah, that, and it also in a way that wasn't really planned. I think the parallels between the kind of writing that I've done and some of what people go through on these shows felt more potent to me than I maybe anticipated it, and I wanted to explore that and play into that, and try to be honest, or at least curious about the fact that maybe the kind of work that I do isn't that far away in some of its impulses than reality TV. And I think, again, one of the things that makes reality TV interesting to talk about is that conversation about it is removed from any altruistic intent or any intellectual intent, and the only thing that you talk about is sort of like the nasty human shit of why is somebody doing this. And I think that's part of writing to me. And when I was, to be perfectly honest, I started writing this book immediately after my second book, Lord Fear, came out, and that was the most personal thing I'd ever written. It was talking about like trauma and family shit and addiction and grief and all these things. And I was having these bizarre twin experiences of being like, what a weird thing to do. Like, why put that out there? Like, what is wrong with me? Why would I do that to myself? Why would I do that to people I love? And then, like, the next minute being like, you know, why hasn't the Times reviewed it? You know what I mean, right? And I think that the creative impulse, or the impulse to be honest or authentic or tell a story that feels important to you or provide something that feels intimate about yourself, and the way that butts up against ambition is a part of writing that is the most uncomfortable to talk about, and I feel like it's being performed by reality performers in this blown up way. And so trying to be honest about the ways that I maybe saw my process in that felt interesting or important.
Yeah, that's interesting, that feeling of kind of wanting your self-exposure to be recognized.
Yeah.
That is the kind of ultimate question sometimes, right, about reality TV, and you tried to get to the bottom of that in a sense, is like, why do you do it? Each chapter has a little excerpt of someone who has written in, was it to casting agents?
There are these big casting websites that do like just sort of like spam out all of the casting calls for various reality shows, but then sometimes, like, before even like emailing to them, like, people just go in the comment section and just seem to like throw their thing, like, look at me out in the comment section, which I sort of stumbled across. So yeah, like, every little chapter has an epigraph that is a anonymous comment section thing about, like, you know, 5'7", 130 pounds, you know, used to play this in high school, now I'm a mom, whatever. Yeah,
here's my brand.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, what's interesting is that it's this weird, uneasy mix of self-exposure, like honesty, and yet this framing. There's always a framing, right? I mean, particularly at the longer reality TV went on, the more there was this self-consciousness. And I mean, any memoir, right? You come to it with a certain kind of framing. Right,
it's like a built-in catch-22, right? Like, you want to be, or I want to be acknowledged for the craft of writing, but then the more you talk about the craft of something, the more you talk about the making of something, the less you're talking about the authenticity of sort of pure self that's there. And that is something that, again, I think reality TV just, like, there's this double bind when you talk about reality TV. Either everybody's an idiot and they're not doing anything, they're just there existing, or they're all liars and they're all bullshitting us and it's all fake. And those two things seem almost impossible to reconcile when talking about it. But that what's actually happening is this weird and uncomfortable gray area between those two things all the time.
Yeah, one of the shows that I've watched all the way through, even though I've basically sort of fallen off the reality bandwagon, but I find the Real Housewives,
Let's talk about it.
Fascinating, but to me there's a real, it's a kind of repetitiveness, and if you actually watch it while thinking about it, which you do beautifully, but I don't necessarily advise. It's this constant, these ongoing conversations about respect, right? About like, hear my pain. You're not reacting in the appropriate way to my pain. Like I literally feel like almost every scene could just be broken down, and it's rehashing these wounds, right? Oh, in a way that you could never do in real life, where you would not have any friends. But they often, these women often will moderate their behavior, I find, right? So if they had a season where the fans thought that they were too horrible, they will often the next season come back and be really boring, because they've had so much feedback from the real world, like, you're an awful person.
Right.
And then they're too dull, and so they're always kind of trying to...
And now I think it's come around to being, it's such a, like, people are so aware of it, and it's such a self-aware form, that when some of the people on the shows criticize each other, they'll criticize each other by being like, oh, like, there she goes again, she's trying to get more screen time, like she heard she was boring last season, right? Like, I mean, it's so open about the fact that, about the artifice of it, and about the fact that it's sort of commenting back on itself in this feedback loop, but somehow it still works in a weird way, like it like incorporates that into it, and then just sort of keeps moving.
Yeah. Well, you repeatedly refer to Nene, who I think maybe would be fair to say is your patron saint, certainly the patron saint of the book. What is so fascinating about
I guess Nene Leakes and I think there's something interesting about, so Nene Leakes is on the Real Housewives of Atlanta, and is just sort of incredible at being herself, right? I mean, I think that one of the things, like, you talk about the fact that these things are repetitive, it puts like this weird pressure on the performer. Like, the only thing that she is allowed to be is herself, and the only situations that she is allowed to exist in are essentially the same situations over and over again, often with the same people. And so there's this like really unique requirement to just like show up and force yourself into screen time and force yourself into being watchable and doing it over and over and over again. It's like this constant self-declaration that she manages to pull off in ways that I find interesting and captivating. And even in like somebody like Kim Kardashian would function the same way, maybe more than anybody, in that like she's pulling off something that has never been done in terms of how long she's doing this. Right? Like, you have to watch her. When you watch her, part of what you're watching is like, holy shit, like, this is still happening. Like, how old was I when I first watched her? And she's doing this, and she's surviving this, and she may always be doing this, right? And we don't know what that looks like yet. So I do think that for performers like that, there's like the rush of just like, it's like you have to walk into a room with the same people over and over and over again and introduce yourself and have somebody give a shit about you, which I just find impressive to do and really interesting.
Right, because most of us, our lives are not actually that interesting, and we would, if we knew how to make them more interesting, we would. But
right, and I don't think that they're like I think that's the thing with somebody like Nene Leakes. It's that her life's not that interesting, right? And ultimately, we kind of know that as people who watch the shows, that it's not like her life is being made more interesting. It's pure force of personality. Mm-hmm. Like, it's pure the way that she presents her life,
right?
Than the actual action.
It's interesting. I think my Real Housewife was always, my fascination was Bethany, who actually once appeared on The Apprentice before The Real Housewives, and I think it was like the Martha Stewart version of The Apprentice. But, you know, she was clearly someone who was using reality TV and was very clear in her goals and achieved them, sort of became like a millionaire, and just kind of flips in and out. And I think she has now some new show, you know, and she's just kind of going to continue, you know, in a way very baldly building her brand with somebody like Nene or Kim Kardashian, it felt more organic. And I sort of like the fact that with Bethany, like, there's no bullshit. You see the strings, it's there. She's not there to make friends.
Yeah, but you still saw her marriage fall apart. You know what I mean? Like no matter what, like no matter how savvy she is, no matter how much she gets the New Yorker profile, where she gets to be like, actually, smart New Yorker readers, I fooled everyone. Like, part of the give and take is still she can be aware and savvy and in some ways be bullshitting everybody, but also it demands that she is offering up something, and it wouldn't work if she didn't. And the weird negotiation between those two things, I think, is what makes her interesting.
Right, and you see the negotiation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's maybe, kind of underlies a lot of what you're talking about, right? Is that it's like a tease, it's like a dance, where you're constantly kind of glimpsing the edges of something real.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And yet you can never quite get to it.
Or you can enough. I think that's what's interesting. Like, there's a moment that I write about in the book of watching a later season of the Teen Mom show on MTV, which is like a prime example of a show that has like totally incorporated its artifice into itself. And it's now like, they're not teenagers anymore. Like, they've gone and had they've had like horrible addictions that were written about in Us Weekly, or aborted porn star careers, or all these things, right? And now they're in their mid to late 20s, but are back as the teen moms with their like 5-year-old kids who are like totally native to being on TV, and the whole thing keeps like groaning forward. But so the show now, like, a lot of the scenes are just like them arguing with the producers. Like, there's no attempt to not have the artifice be there, and in some ways it can be like really jarring and frustrating. But then you'll watch it and you'll be like, this is bullshit, this is bullshit, this is bullshit, this is crazy. It's not. They're showing me that it's bullshit, and then there will be like a 10-second moment in which the mother is freaking out after yelling at the producers, and like her daughter goes and finds her, and they have a moment together that, for whatever reason, amid all of that, for 10 seconds, feels emotionally genuine enough to work. And I think it depends on that mechanism, which is so strange, but also really compelling, I think.
Yeah, you write about, I can't remember if you said this is the first thing that you remember of reality TV, so you'll tell me if there's another moment, but in Survivor, when someone gets badly injured.
Yeah, the guy falls into a fire. Yeah.
It's funny.
It's crazy. It's right. And that was at the very beginning of what would be considered like the modern reality TV boom of this millennium. But it was even still that tension between actual danger, actual pain, and then the apparentness of all of the things that make that constructed. And then you're watching those two things butt up against each other, and you're being challenged in the moment to somehow have both skepticism and emotional reaction at the same time, and somehow that always happens. And I think when people say that their reaction to reality TV is only skepticism, I don't think that that's true. I think that there's always something happening.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of reality TV ended up kind of being structured, right, to capture the moment when the person falls in the fire. And I mean, I feel like one of my low points, one of the things that I feel really ashamed about is, and I was a TV critic, so I had an excuse. I was watching it to write about it, but I remember watching Celebrity Rehab, the season that you talk about, where like Jeff Conaway is like screaming in agony, and all of these sort of has-been stars are just, in this really unbearable
it's like
pain.
Grotesque, yeah.
It is grotesque, and my husband, who's a reality TV shamer, said, this is like, like the Roman Colosseum. Like, what are you doing? Why are you watching? This is the most horrible thing I've ever seen. And I feel like now we came across like Naked and Afraid. You ever seen Naked and Afraid? Naked and Afraid it's all designed to be, to be the worst possible thing that could happen to somebody over the course of an hour.
Even the two words are like just two things that you don't want to be public.
Heard about the show? They literally put two people who are stripped naked. They're allowed to bring one tool. They don't know each other, and they get dropped in the middle of some jungle. It's so literal, and they really. We were on vacation and we turned it on late at night, I mean, there was literally like a woman was so badly burned they had to take her out. I mean, she was like, I think a burning rock fell on her or something. So every week, the whole point, I mean, you'd be very disappointed if somebody didn't get, badly named.
I didn't know that. Damn.
It's intense. Yeah, it's good. I found a new show for you.
Thanks.
But I mean, it feels like there's a level of escalation that happens in the kind of history of reality TV that you kind of need to keep feeding this sensation.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And then that question of like, what is enough, or what's the next thing that you need? Both, what's the next thing that the performer is willing to do, and also what's where the next place that a viewer is willing to go. Yeah, I think that's built into it. Absolutely.
Do you think that it has infected the way that we as viewers behave? Has it helped sort of restructure our brains?
I don't know. That's really interesting. I'm sure in some ways, I think that a level. I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that well. I think it has become a stand-in for an explanation of the worst impulse in everything, right? Like whatever other thing it is that you like, if you say that now we are seeing the reality TV version of that, it has become a really convenient shorthand to say base and disgusting and stupid. When you're watching sports, you're watching politics, even when you talk about like a group of friends, right? Or you're sort of like making fun of people's interactions together. It's like it was like this show. And so I think it's interesting to think about if the behavior was influenced by the shows, or if the shows just sort of become a really convenient way to isolate like our basest qualities and blame it on one specific thing, as opposed to something that is innate and also is spread over. Like, I mean, even with Trump, right? Like the easiest thing in the world is to say that he's the reality TV president, as opposed to he is the racism president, he's the Twitter president, he's the wildly funded propaganda machine president, right? But something about the idea of reality TV being the explanation for the worst in it resonates, I guess.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like you had you have some really lovely moments where you talk about how much you long to be able to capture moments in your own life the way that reality TV does. Right? I mean, it's not like we all have cameras following us around, capturing that perfect afternoon, or that terrible fight with your life, or the just things that they're going to be gone.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things in thinking about reality TV, one of the things that's both terrifying and upsetting about it, and also sort of seductive about it, is that sense of, right, like oh, the cat. That's cute. Of sort of, there's something incredibly appealing about having this backlog of yourself and your experiences, right? And there's something that automatically feels as though that gains importance or value, or can be looked back, or it's real because it was captured. And then there's something absolutely terrifying about that. And I think as a writer, with the kind of writing that I do, that's often the tension there, right? That on the one hand, you think that you are making meaning out of something by regurgitating it or reliving it, and then there's also what you are giving up by doing that. And again, I think it's just a question that reality TV poses in neon lights all the time when you watch it, without any satisfying answers. But there's also, like, you have to watch, and you have to be thinking, like, would you? Would you do that? Would you do that? Do you want to do that? And that's really compelling to me.
So maybe reality TV is actually making you a better person.
Yeah, 100%, for sure it is. I don't know about other people, but I'm a very good person because of it.
Well, clearly it's worked out okay for you. The other thing that I sort of, I love that you, not just that you give it credit, but you talk about the sort of humanity. I mean, we talked about seeing things at the edges of reality TV. And I think, you at one point talk about how human and muddled these characters are, right? Sort of amidst these attempts to kind of create a brand or come in and, make this character, you get these moments that are just like horrifying or amazing, where you just see the confusion.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people can't help be people, and whatever else is built around it, and I think that that's something that I've always been interested in as a writer in general, right? Is you like watching somebody or watching a performance, or there is the remove of being voyeuristic and seeing that thing, but then there's also the attempt to see, if not the best in it, what feels indelibly human in it, and that's what interests me about writing generally, and so why not try to do that with, and it's just super interesting that a form that is theoretically supposed to have its origins in humanity stripped down and put on display is also the thing that invites people to see the least humanity in its participants, and I wanted to try to not do that.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that was, I'm always fascinated by the logistics of making something look real. And I mean, that's something that's part of, theater, scripted television, unscripted television. But in reality TV, it's particularly fascinating, right? Because you're supposed to be looking at it and not thinking about the fact that there's a camera in the restaurant right on top of them. And you actually went and sort of talked to people. I mean, you did some journalism. I'm really curious. What kind of things you surprised you about what you found about the people who were kind of editing and making all of this stuff look flawless.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, so I talked to Robert Kalinsky, who's sort of like the acting coach, and then editors, producers, a star in one case. One of the things that seemed really interesting was that like everybody seemed to feel authorship. Like the producers that I talked to felt like they were wrangling control over performers who were otherwise incoherent in some ways to author the story that would be made of their lives. And editors spoke about feeling as though they were the actual storytellers, right? That they were the people that were taking what was otherwise sort of raw data and splicing a narrative into it. And so the fact that like there's at least 3 or 4 levels of people who feel like they have the authorial point of view going into one scene, I think makes it super interesting. And then so you're sort of watching different people who think that they are telling the story and also have the story that they want to be telling, and sometimes those are working together and sometimes those aren't working together, and having that answer kind of come across the board actually makes sense in retrospect, but was interesting.
Well, at one point I think you say TV wants authenticity, but authenticity it would just be dull. I mean, they had to work incredibly hard. That's so much footage in order to edit it into even, I mean, I can always tell when a show does not have a good editor, because it's just, there's a certain, it's like drugs, right? I mean, it's like a hit. You need a certain amount of kind of incident, every, whatever, 2 minutes or something, or it doesn't feel interesting.
Yeah, you need something, right? I mean, every creative form has structures that either the pleasure is in finding something follow the structure, or there are these tiny little ways in which that's subverted that's interesting. And I think particularly now that reality TV has been popular for close to 2 decades, like anything else, like it's a mature form. Like we have our expectations. It's like when you hear a pop song that you like, and you've heard the first verse, and you've heard the chorus, and you've heard the second verse, and you've heard the second chorus, and like something in you is like, the fucking bridge is coming. You know what I mean? And that's part of the language that you understand. And reality TV is like a mature enough form that's part of it. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's super interesting. And then you see the way that shows are dealing with what could both be predictable but also pleasurable, or also an opportunity to subvert it. And I think there's no real way of knowing how it'll look in 3 years.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch it evolve, because I remember, the first season of The Real World, the castmates complained afterwards because they were really shocked at the way they were portrayed. And they said, we didn't do that. We didn't act that way. They set this stuff up. And it was really shocking, I think, to viewers, this idea that very quickly that got absorbed. And every new sort of incarnation of that, the other thing I can think of is the ending of The Hills.
Where they do the pullback.
They pull back. And which was very meta, really, for
The
Hills. But they pull back, and you see the set, and I just remember people actually being really shocked. I can't believe, were they actually filming on a set? What's real? Was none of that real?
And I think it's also worth noting that the history of anything that even is a gesture towards reality TV was met with horror and derision when it first happened. Right, when the real world first happened, right, there was all this stuff of people coming up being like, that wasn't what it was, I can't believe they did that to me. Every critical review was vicious, and you're telling us that this is supposed to be coming out of a cinema verite position, and they just put 6 strangers in a house and say it's verite. It does, there was, but even if people say that the original reality show was the PBS show in the 70s called An American Family, that is now talked about as this sort of authentic ethnography that has been perverted by the genre. The reviews of that show when it came out were terrible. People were horrified about it. They thought it was disgusting. And so part of the tradition of anything like reality TV is looking back and saying there was a better time. What are we doing? Part of the appeal to everybody is being look at our... I talk to producers now who were in some ways nostalgic about the way that the Kardashians were made, because that feels so much more substantive and authentic than reality shows that are just coming out now, right? And when the Kardashians came out, people were and are still horrified by how much of a perversion that felt like of something like the real world, despite the fact that the same production company did it. That sort of built into it is this sort of oh no, remember when we were good people? Remember when we didn't lie? That's always been part of the narrative.
That's really fascinating. Can you go on a little bit about how the Kardashians were once...
It was this idea of authenticity, and I went and wrote an article that part of it sort of ends up in the book about a reality TV industry convention, and this was in 2016, and reality TV is in sort of a tough spot and was really freaking out then because with all sorts of things of people not having cable anymore, and there being all of these really slick and well produced scripted shows, and also people on YouTube getting 5 million views for opening presents. There's sort of the question of why would anybody watch reality TV anymore, and it feels long in the tooth. And so they were having this what are we doing in the industry moment, and everything, every panel, every conversation was about, we need to get back to authenticity. And there was a moment that was authentic before this one, which was bonkers and nuts to say that. And then it was about sort of defining what authenticity was. So they would be they would use an example of these horrible shows that came out, the shows that came after Jersey Shore that weren't Jersey Shore but had people with Jersey accents doing something else. They were low rent Jersey Shore, and they would be these shows were terrible because they were so obviously scripted, so they were inauthentic. Unlike when you watch the Kardashians, and I would be well, don't people always complain about those shows being inauthentic and scripted? And they were well, yeah, they're sort of scripted, but the people are authentic, right? So you can sort of find all of these ways to read authenticity into something if you want to.
Right, so it's we're constantly rewriting our ideas of authenticity, and I actually prize the moment when there was a little bit of a revolt against that, and you had, if you remember, there's a show called Joe Schmo.
Yeah.
Which was it was a prank show, and the entire show was fake. It was all actors who were all hired to prank one guy who did not know it was fake. And it was actually kind of a beautiful thing because it was just one real person, and everyone else was so moved in a way by this horrible thing that they were doing. They were constantly having to kind of consult how to better trick this guy. Yeah. Yeah. But it felt like that was a direction, kind of a moment where
right, everything at least involves in some way trying to what is the thing that we are going to do to try to make a certain version of authenticity work for people, and the fact that authenticity is that malleable and easy to create is terrifying. But I think is again what's interesting about the genre.
Well, and authenticity aside, there is a way in which reality TV has a bigger range of people, real people, I mean, I think reality TV was the first time that you actually saw, people on television who were poor, right? Who were, not beautiful, who had bad skin, who had bad teeth. I mean, it's one of the things that I still find fascinating. I mean, Real Housewives aside, like a lot of reality television is I mean, there is a sense in which it's a kind of democratizing.
Yeah, there is in some really disturbing ways, but also, in some interesting ways, like there's a representational quality to it. Absolutely.
I mean, do you think that makes it less, I don't know, it's an unfair question, makes it less of a scourge? I mean, I mean that in an ironic way, but
I don't know. I mean, I don't want, I feel like there was a period in the book, or there's a section of the book that attempts to sort of function as like a gesture towards a defense of it as an art form that kind of falls by the wayside and then just becomes sort of bonkers. So I don't know. Like I don't know if it's I think it's not interesting. It's certainly not interesting to me to call reality TV a scourge sincerely, right?
Right.
But similarly, I don't know if trying to make the case for it ethically works either, right? I mean, I think that what's more interesting to me is trying to find like an aesthetic argument for it, and that's the one that isn't made, I don't think.
Right, and I think the book makes that argument in all kinds of like different and interesting ways.
Thanks.
So it's a letter. In some ways, it's structured at least as kind of an ongoing conversation with your loved one. What has been her reaction to?
Oddly generous. I mean, there's like a part in the book in which she reads an early draft and gets pissed off when we talk about it. So yeah, I mean that's. She's an actress, and part of the book is sort of about her performances, and then just sort of both of us as people who want to make art in our own ways, and the differences in the way that we go about that. And so I think a lot of what the book talks about is also sort of conversations that we have with each other and things that she thinks about. And so maybe because of that, I mean, she's read like 9 drafts of it, and has been ultimately really, really supportive, which is nice.
And does she watch with you? Does she watch all these shows?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't have been able to maintain this.
No, hell no. Yeah.
Well, I think also, yeah.
Sorry, do you want to open up to some questions?
Yeah. Are you ready?
Sure. What? Yeah.
Okay. Let's go for it.
Yeah, I only read an excerpt from the book on long form. It wasn't very long, but it seemed from that that your marriage is good and it's working. Yeah. And I was just wondering how you even dare to write about something so impossible as like love that works.
Yeah, that's a hard question. Writing about something that works is way harder than writing about a breakup, apparently. I guess it started with this sense of like, on the one hand, it felt really scary to try to write about reality TV in a way that was like literary or serious. And then it also seemed incredibly challenging and scary to try to write about 2 people that are sort of in like a regular happy marriage in a way that would seem to do it justice. And the twin scariness of those things felt interesting, and also just the challenge of being like, I think I have a good marriage, but a lot of that marriage is like, a lot of experience is like sitting and watching TV, or if you're not a TV person, like sitting and like refilling coffee and sitting in silence or whatever, right? Like there are these moments that actually make up a lived experience that are passive and in some ways easy to pretend as like these are the moments that aren't. These are the moments where everybody turns off, and then there's like the 3 good moments a day, and to try to incorporate something that would feel like the least active and also the most embarrassing part of our shared lives in terms of like sitting down and watching TV together for 3 hours, and to try to find a huge part of our love story in that. at least that was able to trick me into thinking like that's its own weird little task to try that I hadn't seen somebody try to do, so I didn't have to think that much about the sort of hugeness of it. Also, every book I've ever written is sort of part personal and part not personal, and I have always convinced myself in every project that it's not a personal project, and been like, this is an investigation of something. So I lied to myself all the way through, basically.
Anybody else?
I wonder what you think the experience of the reader will be, of a reader who has very, very little knowledge or experience watching reality TV versus one who has as much, if not more, than you. And also the experience of a reader who knows you or to whom you're a complete stranger.
All of them will love it. I do think, I mean, that's sort of a challenge of it, right, is it was trying to think about writing something that would both be covering territory that some people know very well in a way that feels new, and also making something that would seem totally new and incoherent to somebody legible. That, I don't know if I pulled that off, but that was the goal. But that feels like, I mean, I don't know, when I wrote a book about baseball, non-baseball fans seem to like it a lot more than baseball fans. So maybe that's the direction that I accidentally err in. I don't know. I hope that it just feels like a weird enough document on its own that whatever you're bringing into it, it sort of takes over that. But I don't know if it does.
Yeah, I would just add, I don't think you need to. I mean, there were certainly plenty of shows and characters and that I didn't know. I mean, I don't think that it's a requirement to watch reality TV. And in fact, I think, in some ways, as I said, I think most people don't necessarily think that hard when they're watching reality TV. So, if having watched all these shows is not necessarily going to help you sort of to think. I mean, you use them as entry points rather than kind of,
I mean, for me, I guess there's sort of a tradition of writing that I really like, that is sort of the kind of essayistic writing that is the story of somebody thinking about something. And often, like a lot of the books that I really love are theoretically about a subject that is not a subject that I care about, and then you end up sort of reading the balance between, then it becomes you're reading about one person trying to understand something better. And so I guess the mechanism is that hopefully the process of trying to understand something becomes, there's like a certain kind of nonfiction that's, I guess, about the question as opposed to the answer. And so that is hopefully the tradition that I would hope to be writing in, just with a very particular subject.
Anybody else? I think that's it.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.